I have clicked onto the Global Tropical Overview for June the 12th, 2024. As is always the case in these videos, the thought expression are mine alone, and in making any decisions ahead of any tropical cyclones, look to the local office, local emergency management, and local tropical cyclone warning center. So we have a few areas of interest to watch across the Atlantic and East Pacific this week, and as we go into next week as well. We have Invest 90L sitting here over the Florida Peninsula today, forecast to come offshore in the next day and may have a small chance to become a tropical cyclone once it does so. We're also going to be watching over really the next week Central America, as we have a Central American gyre pattern taking shape, and this may support development on both sides of the continent in the East Pacific and the Atlantic. We're going to focus firstly on the short term, which is Invest 90L. This is the close-up visible loop showing that we have a little bit of a center here sitting over the Florida Peninsula, but the system overall is not looking overly healthy. You can see that we have just this naked circulation here sitting over land, and all the convection is sitting south and east of that center position. So you can see all the convection just sitting here over South Florida, the Bahamas, and into the open Atlantic. And this is highlighting some pretty strong shear aloft. If we look at the water vapor loop, you can see that there's just so much shear. We have, in some cases, 30 to 40 knots of shear I've seen on some modeled soundings from this environment, just shearing apart any convection that was near the center yesterday. And this is not good for the system in terms of development, as one thing that tropical cyclones don't like is the thunderstorms to be sheared away from them. They like it to be over their center, not, a few hundred miles away from them like they are right now. But there may still be some chance for the system to develop once it comes offshore. And one thing that is going to have to be watched is we can see this low here, and it has been, I believe, a little bit more well-defined, at least it was yesterday off of the coast of Tampa. It has been a little bit more defined than models had anticipated for this time, and that could go in its favor, mainly because you can see if we look at the GFS low-level vorticity or spin plot, it has been consistently showing this broad low sitting offshore, and this is not all too favorable with the shear that we have in place, because we need, for this system to consolidate into a more compact low, we need a lot of convection to sustain over a specific spot within this. And if it's all getting sheared away, that can make that process a little difficult. And it can end up just staying a broad low, and it just never fully gets consolidated before it tracks further northeast. You can see that on the model, it just really never gets itself going on here. But if the low can stay like it is now, a little bit more consolidated, it's possible that this could aid the system once it comes offshore, and then we could see maybe higher odds of tropical development. The Euro is a bit more enthusiastic on the development of the low. You can see if we go onto the same plot on the European, it actually does get a fairly compact low here. This could be a tropical depression or a tropical storm on the model, much more enthusiastic than the GFS. Now, another thing that also is important is how it interacts with its upper level environment. The GFS 200 millibar flow plot looks like this, and this looks the same on the European as well. We have, once again, this big trough over the eastern US. This is what's shearing it. But we have another part of this trough that's sitting over the Carolinas here, and this could interact in a way to be a little bit more favorable for the low. So in this plot, the system's sitting about here off the coast of South Carolina and North Carolina. And you can sort of see how we have a little bit of a lighter pocket of shear aloft on this. And you see that it's not overly well defined, but we have maybe a little bit of an anticyclonic turning with the flow plot here just off the coast of North Carolina on this map. And this could be an indication that maybe in this lower shear pocket, this trough is aiding more convective development, so more thunderstorms over the center, and it's able to get this more compact center developed, and through that you get this more anticyclonically curved flow north of the low, and from that you can get the system to maybe develop into a brief tropical storm. Now the GFS, like I said, is not all too enthusiastic. It keeps the system fairly broad, but the European does show more of a compact low developing. And we can see on this upper level wind plot that it has much more of a I guess a word here would be more intimate interaction with this trough, to where now you can see that we have much more of an anticyclonically turning flow here north of the system on the eastern side of this trough. And this is a very fragile type of setup. The shear is always going to remain high. It's never going to be very low. But if it can manage to get convection blowing up in that lighter pocket of shear and take advantage of the dynamics within this trough coming east, that could be its opportunity to develop. And one thing that could also further support it, like I said, is if this low remains a little bit more compact and doesn't really fully dissipate away, like maybe some models are anticipating to occur. We'll see how it goes through, but in terms of impacts, the main impacts are happening right now. You can see all this heavy rainfall continuing across South Florida and the Bahamas, and the good news is for the Carolinas and Georgia, the wind shear should keep all of this convection off towards the east, and really we shouldn't have many issues at all from this system, and it looks like everything looks pretty good here for the beaches if you're on there in the Carolinas. But this is just your usual June type system where it may just be a short-lived, very weak tropical storm, and it goes off, and that's your first name of the season. But that's not the only chance of development we have as we go throughout the next week in the Atlantic. As I mentioned, we have a Central American gyre pattern taking shape around the Central American region. And what this is, for those who don't know, is a broad area of low pressure that forms around Central America, usually around this time of year. It can also happen in October and November. And this can, in a lot of cases, lead to tropical development, as you usually have a lot of convection going off here, and parts of this gyre is over water. So some of that can form into an area of low pressure, which can eventually go on to become a tropical cyclone. And we can already tell that this is taking shape. If we look at the wind fields alone, you can see it on this map. If you look in the Caribbean here, you can see some trade winds highlighted by low-level clouds rushing off towards the west, towards the Yucatan Peninsula and Cuba. If you look out here in the East Pacific, you can see that normally you would expect winds going towards the west with the normal trade winds, but we have winds instead coming towards the west, towards Central America. And the net effect of this is a background spin like this that revolves around Central America. And you can see some impacts of that already, where we have a lot of convection blowing up here south of Mexico. And this area of convection south of Mexico is our first stop for potential development here. Now, one thing that's very important to remember with Central American gyres is that they are very broad. You can see here just how broad it is on the GFS ensemble, stretching from about Colombia all the way to nearly northeastern Mexico. And this can make it difficult for models to exactly pinpoint where a system may form within it, because you could get, say a lobe forming here, or here, or even here, and any of these could take over as the dominant low, and that could change an entire forecast for a system. But you can look at current trends and see maybe is one scenario a bit more likely than the others. And if we look again at the satellite imagery, you can see we have all this convection going on south of Mexico, which would make sense. We have a bit more increased convergence in this region with these anomalous westerly winds in the East Pacific. And this would tend to favor, especially because the upper low environment is getting more favorable, the potential for tropical development. And I think that this is looking like more of a likely scenario that we're going to be dealing with in the East Pacific and the Atlantic, of a system developing from this and then eventually swinging back into the Gulf of Mexico, and then we could see further development from there. You can see this on the GFS. If we look at the low-level vorticity or spin plot, you can see that it develops a tropical cyclone from this. Now, one thing that's important with these is these storms are usually not too strong, but they often have a lot of rainfall with them, and with the mountainous terrain here, we could absolutely have a lot of issues with flooding and mudslides from this. But one characteristic of Central American gyre storms, and you can think back to 2020 with this, with tropical storms Amanda and Cristobal, if a storm forms like here, like on the GFS, this is going to tend to revolve around the main gyre. So once the system forms, it's not going to go west like you would normally expect in the East Pacific. It's going to track east, revolving around this low. So this is going to swing back into the Bay of Campeche here, And that remnant energy, it's not going to stay a tropical cyclone from the high terrain, but the remnant energy could allow tropical development to occur. And the environment is looking favorable for both sides of the basin. You can see that we're forecast to have lots of upper level high pressure here over the Western Caribbean and East Pacific. And this could favor tropical development on both sides, in the East Pacific and in the Atlantic. And as such, the National Hurricane Center has marked areas of interest on both sides of North America. You can see this one in the southwest Gulf of Mexico. They're giving this about a 30% chance of development within the next week. And you can see in the East Pacific, 20% chance over the next 7 days. And you can also see their odds for 90L, 20% as well over the next 7 days, although 90L is really more 4 days or 3 days. But we'll continue to monitor the Central American gyrotype system. The good news is it's not an imminently forming system. It will take some time for something to form from that, but it could absolutely lead to a lot of significant rainfall across Central America. And for those in those regions, make sure you're staying weather aware and staying tuned to the National Hurricane Center for the latest updates on their tropical weather outlooks and any advisories they may issue on tropical cyclones. And for those in Florida and the Bahamas, just make sure you're watching the National Hurricane Center page as well for development on that. But more importantly, stay tuned to the National Weather Service and the Bahamas Meteorological Service as well for any warnings if there are flooding issues. I know we've had a lot of flooding issues over the past couple of days over Florida. And if you get any warnings, make sure you're taking those seriously as they're issued for a reason. That's all that I've got for today. Thanks for watching.